It started as the kind of summer day you forget. Cloudless, with the lazy hum of cicadas filling the air. My best friend, Charlie, and I were stuck in our tiny town with nothing to do but count the hours until school started again. This happened in the summer of 1987, before the internet and Xbox. We had watched every stupid movie and went fishing in the pond behind my house 100 times. But boredom is a dangerous thing, especially for two 17-year-olds with more curiosity than common sense. It was Charlie who suggested it. "You know the old Willow Creek funeral home? The one by the railroad tracks," he said. "They shut it down years ago. We should check it out." "You mean break-in?" I asked, already feeling that mix of excitement and dread in my gut. "Not break in. Explore," he said, grinning. "What's the worst that could happen?" Nobody ever went out there, and for good reason. That funeral home had been the subject of a scandal 20 years ago. It was way out of town, and the owner had run the business since the late 60s. His specialty was county burial contracts, taking care of the bodies that families either failed to claim or couldn't afford to bury. But as the owner grew older, he began suffering from senility, or maybe dementia. His assistants quit, but he continued to work on his own. In time, the work piled up. People began to get suspicious the old man couldn't be keeping up with things on his own. They were right. When the county finally decided to check on things, they found a real-life horror show. It was clear that the owner had done little over the past several years other than receive bodies in and collect the money for them. Dozens of unburied bodies were stacked throughout the funeral home, many without embalming, decaying with overpowering stench. Others had been buried in shallow, unmarked graves in the woods behind the home. It took a hazmat team a week to clear the place out, and it sat as a shunned ruin ever since. That history was enough to keep most people away, but teenagers looking for a thrill would be attracted to such a haunted spot. But there was a bit more to the story. The old man had used many outdated and dangerous chemicals in his embalming process. His neglect of them caused the contamination of the whole area and a significant cancer risk to anyone exposed. Hazardous area signs were posted all around, so even kids and teenagers avoided the area like a plague. But Charlie had learned a secret from his cousin, who was with the city police. The hazardous chemical story was made up by the police chief to make sure mischievous kids stayed clear of the area permanently. It was all propaganda. That information gave Charlie and I a golden opportunity. Not only could we let everyone at school know how we had been duped all these years about the place, but we could also be the first to explore the most infamous location in the county. We set out late in the afternoon, biking down the cracked asphalt roads that led out of town. The funeral home loomed at the end of a long gravel driveway, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. The front lawn was overgrown. The once pristine sign faded to the point of illegibility. "Creepy as hell," I muttered as we leaned our bikes against a rusting fence. Charlie grinned. "That's the point." The front door was locked, of course, but Charlie had brought a crowbar. "Just in case," he'd said. The wood splintered with a satisfying crack, and we slipped inside. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust coated every surface, and the only light came from the late afternoon sun streaming through cracks in the boarded-up windows. "This place is a dump," I said, kicking aside a broken chair. "It's perfect," Charlie remarked, pulling out his camera. "We'll be legends." We wandered through the main floor, which was mostly empty, save for a few broken pieces of furniture and some scattered paperwork. Then we found the embalming room. The equipment was still there, covered in grime but eerily intact. Metal tables, and a row of rusty tools that looked more like torture devices than medical instruments. "Dude, this is insane," Charlie exclaimed, his voice tinged with awe. "Can you imagine working here?" "Not really," I said, running my fingers over one of the tables. It was ice cold despite the summer heat. I shivered and pulled my hand back. "Let's check out the basement," Charlie shouted, already heading for the stairs. "Do we have to?" I asked, my unease growing. But Charlie was already heading down before I finished asking. The basement stairs creaked ominously under our weight. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint metallic smell became stronger. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a long hallway lined with heavy steel doors. Some were slightly ajar, revealing gurneys and empty shelves, but most were sealed tight. We moved cautiously, stepping over debris and broken tiles. Near the far end of the hallway, the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving a jagged opening just large enough to squeeze through. Beyond it, we could see another room. Charlie, ever fearless, crawled through first. I hesitated but followed, the rubble scraping at my arms and legs. As soon as I pulled myself through, a heavy cabinet that had been leaning precariously against the wall fell over behind me, blocking the entrance behind us. "Oh crap," Charlie muttered, brushing dust off his clothes. "Guess we might have to dig our way back out." I wasn't too concerned initially, because the entrance was covered by loose plaster and rubble, easy to clear out. I also figured the way ahead would have another way out anyway. The room we'd entered was larger than the others, with walls lined with cabinets and a large steel vault at the center. The air felt damp and oppressive, and the temperature seemed to drop another few degrees. Charlie walked over to the vault. "What do you think they kept in here?" "Bodies probably," I said, shivering. "Or chemicals. Let's not mess with it." Charlie ignored me and gave the door a few tugs. "It's locked anyway, or maybe the hinges are just rusted solid." I looked for another way out, but there were no other doors or windows, and the vault door was of heavy iron and frozen shut. So, we were going to have to dig out the way we had come in. I started to excavate, but within a few seconds I cleared enough of the rubble to reveal that the debris was only an inch deep, and beneath it lay reinforced concrete, iron rebar jutting out of it like teeth. The sight of it sent a wave of panic through me, and the reality of our situation began to sink in. I tried to push the fallen cabinet out of the way, but not only was it massively heavy, I could not position myself in the narrow space to get any leverage on it. I searched for something in the room to use as a lever, but there was nothing useful that I could find. Charlie had grabbed a chunk of concrete from the pile of rubble nearby and began pounding with it to widen the entrance, but the concrete that made up the wall was more resilient than the chunk he held in his hand. It broke apart after a few hits. He kept at it for half an hour before admitting he was making no progress at all. "We should have told someone we were coming here," I muttered as we sat on the cold floor, the damp seeping into my jeans. "This is so stupid." Charlie didn't respond. He just stared at the walls, his flashlight flickering as the battery began to die. We spent at least an hour pacing around the room, checking and double-checking for any other way out or for anything useful to help us escape, our frustration and panic growing with each minute. The faint light coming from the room entrance began to fade as night approached, and we began to fatigue from the enormous amount of nervous energy we had been expending. As the hours dragged on, the darkness became absolute. And with the onset of night, the atmosphere became even colder. We huddled together for warmth. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance. Then the tapping started. At first, it was faint, like the sound of fingers drumming against wood. I thought it was my imagination until Charlie's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. The tapping grew louder, moving along the walls as if circling us. We shone the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. We were both filled with horror. The sound kept circling, like a predator sizing us up. There was nothing we could do. We just sat there, our arms wrapped around our knees, rocking slightly. I tried to stay calm, but the cold was unbearable. It wasn't all that cold, maybe low 50s, but we weren't dressed for it. Over time, the mild cold wore us down. My teeth chattered, so hard I thought they might break. I'd never felt so helpless. I wished I could sleep to escape the darkness and the cold, but my fear and the cold and the relentless subtle noises made it impossible. I felt that whatever kept circling was waiting for us to nod off. I wish I had brought a watch, as time seemed to drag on forever. That became a new torture all its own. Then in the inky blackness, I started to detect a new sound. Something in the room. A scratching. A shuffling. It seemed to be in front of me, maybe only about 10 feet away. I kept nodding off, from fatigue, waking up shivering violently. Then one time, after nodding off in a half-sleep state, out of the darkness a frightening face. Its eyes were only hollow sockets, its thin dried-out skin stretched out over a skull, and a ghastly open maw of a mouth leering over me with brown-stained rotten teeth, belching some stench from deep within its spoiled moldy guts. I jumped awake, but the sight remained, only for a split second. I sat there gawking into the darkness, unsure of the reality of what I had seen. It had seemed like a dream, but it had been there even when I had opened my eyes, if only for a moment. My shriek had startled Charlie fully awake. He asked me what had happened. "Listen," I whispered, and we both heard the rustling sound circling us once more, maybe 5 feet away now. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," he whispered. The sound kept circling back and forth in the dark for hours, like it was waiting for us to wear out from fatigue and doze off again. We kicked our feet and shouted at it, but it would only pause a few seconds, then continue its invisible pacing. Then, after what seemed an eternity, the rustling stopped. Shortly after that, I detected a faint glow from the room entrance. Morning was coming. With the growing light, I found some feeble energy to move about the room again. We were both weak and dehydrated. The air was so damp, but for all the water that was in the air, there was not a drop of water we could find. The stone walls were moist with precipitation. I tried licking the moisture from them, but it just left a gritty, foul taste in my mouth. Though very little light was coming through the entrance, it was enough to know it was fully daytime outside. I figured this would be my last, as I doubted we would survive another night. I began thinking of what I should do in my final hours. Should I use a piece of plaster to scrawl some last words on the wall? Maybe I should just sit and pray. I decided to try Charlie's idea of pounding the opening to the room with a piece of broken concrete again, futile though it was. In my weakened state, my results were even more disappointing than Charlie's attempts, but as I neared giving up, I heard voices. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. Someone was calling our names. "Over here!" I croaked, my voice barely audible. My throat was so dry. I tried desperately, but I couldn't even cry out to save myself. There was no way they could hear me. I was in a panic that the voices would drift away and we would never be found. I grabbed a piece of concrete and began beating on the heavy metal cabinet that had blocked the entrance. It reverberated with a mercifully loud bang. Moments later, a beam of light pierced the darkness, and I saw a group of volunteers picking their way through the rubble. Relief flooded over me as they pushed the cabinet out of the way, pulled us to our feet, and guided us out of the suffocating darkness. As we emerged into the daylight, the warmth of the sun felt almost unreal. Charlie and I were covered in dust and trembling from the cold, but we were alive. Apparently, when we were reported missing last night, Charlie's cousin figured we might have gone to the old funeral home after what he had revealed to Charlie. Because of what happened to us, the county bulldozed the property, and thankfully, it's just a flattened patch of earth now. Neither Charlie nor I ever spoke much about what we'd heard down there, and I've never gone near the Willow Creek Funeral Home again. Even though the building is gone, I have the suspicion that whatever was down in that cellar that night, it might still be there,